Denise, can you see the slide?
I can. Looks beautiful.
Hey Denise, do you happen to have up the shared slide deck for the end? Because I, for some reason, cannot get it to open on my Chromebook, that you can just share the link at the end in the chat.
Share the link. Is the link in the deck?
No, we were just going to put it in the chat because they won't be able to access it if they
Oh, I see.
can access it on the screen.
Yep. So once we get going and we get started, I will do that, okay?
Okay, I have a question. Can I take my camera off, or am I leaving my camera on this whole time?
It's up to you, Molly.
What do you prefer?
We would love to see your smiling face.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it's 3:45. Should we get started, ladies? Perfect. Okay.
Definitely.
So welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's session number 2 on counting 3 strategies that make it work. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we truly do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. At this time, we'd just like to take a moment and acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. We have a full panel of guest educators today. Jennifer Ellis is joining us. She is an SK1 teacher from Dresden. We have an FDK team from Plimpton, Wyoming, Tressa Brown and Molly Hendra. And we also have Carissa Houle. She is an FDK teacher from High Park. My name is Denise Ladd, and I am an elementary instructional coach with the board. And I'm being joined today by my partner, Alicia Schenk. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, everyone.
It's really great to be here working with such an amazing teachers from the board. And today we are going to be learning lots of valuable lessons.
Yes, so we are going to quickly run through what is going to take place today. So the first thing we're going to discuss are the 3 components of counting. We're going to talk about a few common counting errors and what teachers can do to support that development of counting. And then we're also going to take a look at some of the critical key ideas that children need to learn to count. So our dear friend Heather Wark is here joining us. She is almost becoming a household name, we joke about, with our board. So Heather, thank you so much for being here, and it's all yours.
Thanks very much for having me again to talk about early childhood education, early years learning. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. It definitely got me started really in digging into math education when my own children were young, and I was really curious about, how they developed these initial pieces of understanding of numbers. So it's kind of a spot that's a bit dear to my heart for sure. And today we get to talk about counting, and I think for most of us as educators, we think that this is probably where number kind of starts. And I know I did until digging into it. But last week, of course, we looked at subitizing, and we talked about that that's a great place to start with number. And I was going for a walk with a colleague yesterday, and she told me that she has a 2-year-old granddaughter. She's been working on subitizing, and she can now do sets of 1 and 2. So now she's working towards 3. So I think I'm looking forward to that being, a little bit more normal, I guess, in a regular household where you might start subitizing with these young children. So when they come to us, they're kind of ready for counting. But I thought we might take a look at this little video, and this young gentleman who's doing some counting, and I labeled it here already correct counting. So I just thought we'd take a look here at him counting this set of 20. And I just realized that I think I didn't share the computer sound, so I want to make sure I do that first. Okay, here we go.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12,
So there we get to watch him doing a correct counting. And I just thought we could put in the chat, you know, what do you notice him doing that helps him get to correct counting? So you just one idea, throw it up into the chat. What is he doing? Or maybe we don't have the chat enabled this time.
Yes, I have enabled the chat.
Oh, you have, okay,
Just
great.
people need to make sure that they select all panelists and attendees when they are posting something so everyone will see it.
Yeah, there's a little extra layer, I think, in the chat so that everyone can see, so all panelists and attendees. So just throw an idea up there. One thing that you saw him do that helped him get to the correct number of 20 at the end. So I see Kim's got that he's tagging each one. Carissa. And it's okay if you don't know the lingo and you can just describe it. I know when we are working with teachers, we encourage them to just describe it first, and then you can assign a name to that lingo later. Assigning a number to each item. He does kind of pause at the end of the row. He's sort of solidifying that number probably at the end of those rows a little bit. Okay, so there's lots of things that he already knows when we look at his strategies that he's using in order to be able to get to a correct count at the end of his sequence. So we're going to break down the pieces today so we can look at all of the brilliance that it takes and actually a fair bit of knowledge that it takes in order to be able to do what we just witnessed him do. All right, so we looked at this last week, but I'll just mention it again in case some of you weren't here with us. But you'll be familiar with part of this picture, which is Dr. Lawson's continuum for numeracy development, a student continuum from numeracy for addition and subtraction. And what you'll probably be familiar with is from this part onward. But in this series, we're actually going to be looking at this pre-addition continuum, because when we were out presenting the material on the continuum of addition and subtraction, lots of teachers asked us, well, what happens if they can't yet add or count? And so that's where this work at this addition to the continuum comes from. And so the part that we're going to be looking at today is this area here with the number sequence, tagging. And we'll look at all of these different components, these different strategies that make up correct counting. This piece doesn't come from Alex's own research, but from other researchers. And so we're just sharing their knowledge on top of Alex's picture. We're going to start by talking about the number sequence in and of itself. And by number sequence, I mean the oral set of numbers in the correct order. So the sequence of number words that you use to count, that's Dr. Lawson's definition from her book. And in this picture, you see the 0 there, which it's a cute picture, but is there actually, we don't say 0, of course, when we're counting. So it would just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the other thing that I want to draw your attention to is that even though in the picture we see the number symbols, this is not about the number symbols. This is just about the oral counting words, the words. The symbols can come later, but we need those words and we need them in the right order. So errors that kids can make with the number sequence are that they can be missing numbers in the sequence. That's pretty common. They can be repeating the same numbers. They can just kind of go back over the same number words that they've already said. And they can certainly be saying them out of order. So I had some of our guests work with a couple of their students to show us what a number sequence error might look like or sound like in this case, because it's just the oral number sequence. And so we have a video for us to listen to of this. And so I just want you to note as a teacher, you know, what what part of the number sequence does he know really well? And then where does it kind of fall apart?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18.
All right, so what did you notice? You can put it in the chat about his number sequence. What does he know well, and then where does it kind of fall apart? Yeah. So I see 12, I see 13. Yes, the teen numbers are tricky, particularly in English. And if you teach in French immersion, also challenging in French. I think to some degree, French is the one language that I'm aware of that is more challenging than English, just because of the base. They have a base 20 system going on in French, which is a bit tricky. For mathematics, some countries actually have a much more distinct base 10 system going on in their number names. So for example, instead of 11, the name for that number would be 10 and 1. And 12 would be 10 and 2, and 13 is 10 and 3. So there's definitely a lot of research that suggests that that type of oral number names helps students with place value and really understanding what's going on inside those numbers. But we speak English, or we're speaking English right now, and so we're kind of stuck with the number system that we have. I do know some kindergarten and grade 1 teachers who have used kind of a bridge of 10 and 1 and also called 11. So I'm not sure if there's research on doing that, but I know that they like that. So Kelly says Spanish is like that too. Yeah. So we see him have trouble with, I think he says 13. I could be wrong. Maybe his educator can pipe up if they remember. But then 14 and 15 are missing, and then we hear him say 16. That's what I hear, but it can be a bit tricky. I can't remember who sent in that video, but it's a little tricky, but I think he says 13. Anyway, that's the type of error that can be made in the number sequence. So he's missing some numbers. So there's lots of other things for sure that students can do other than just miss numbers. Like I said, they can repeat numbers. We even talked about the fact that some kindergartners will say letters instead of numbers. They just really don't know this sequence at all. So what we need to do is to help them learn this rote, memorized number sequence, the sequence of numbers. It's like a poem or saying the alphabet. It doesn't have any real meaning necessarily, but they do have to be able to say them in the right order. So how can we support students to know this number sequence? We're not going to watch the whole thing, but this is a video that was sent in of something that maybe happens in a typical classroom, which is some songs that might help. All right, I'm going to stop it there. So what kinds of things are you going to be looking for when you're evaluating, if you're using this type of resource in your classroom? And I think this is pretty common in many classrooms to use, some animated videos. What kinds of things are you looking for to best support your students to move forward with these types of things? And I think one of the things that we're looking for is that the counting sequence is happening in the forward order only, so that you're counting in the forward direction, so they really learn that progression. And the other thing that I think about that I didn't actually put on my list here is that it's at the numbers where the students in front of it need to work. So if you're working with students who are struggling with the teens, like the little gentleman in the video ahead of this, you'd want to have a video or some sort of song that goes up into the area that he needs to practice. So 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, we would need to definitely move up into that area. And I know there's lots of different songs out there that do head up into the 20 territory. So forward order is really important. And so not counting backwards or skip counting, which they don't really understand the skip counting anyway, usually, if they're still struggling with the number sequence, and it just kind of messes up with their understanding of, what number follows the next one. So I would avoid skip counting and counting backwards until they already have a solid forward number sequence. And then you can start looking at some of those other things. I wonder if there's any questions, thoughts, comments from the panel about
Heather, I was
that.
actually just thinking about that. I have been working with some FTK classrooms, and I'm glad that you said looking for those songs that kind of are working within the number sequence that the students need. One little group that we were working with had trouble up to 9, and originally they were singing a song that went kind of all the way up to 20. So to really target in and focus on that sequence just from 1 to kind of 8 or 9, it was really valuable for those students and allowed them to really focus in just on that. And then, as you said, when they're ready to move on to something a little bit bigger, then they have that confidence for the first part, so they can make that next jump.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We're always trying to tailor our instruction to the students in front of us. And part of that is sort of knowing where their error is in the sequence. And so what part do we really need to focus in on? Because it allows us to get more repetitions of the area that they really need the most help. So for your students, if they were counting to 20, probably everything past 9 was a little bit of a blur anyway. It would be my guess if they were working on number sequence to 9. And so they weren't really getting any value of anything past 9 or 10. And so best to just focus and repeat that shorter sequence. It'd be more helpful for that group. I mean, obviously sometimes you're working with the whole class, so you just have to, hit for the middle, or, stretch some students, or be okay with them just knowing that they're not going to get much value past a certain point. But then of course also, as we always do, targeting towards the specific area for those students.
Heather, there's a question actually that just popped up, and Sally was wondering, at what point is it appropriate to begin skip counting with students? So when would that be appropriate for them to be able to do?
Such a great question. I would do it only after they are correctly counting, like the little gentleman in the front, where they really have demonstrated that they understand how to count many different types of collections correctly. Because as we're going to see as we head through the rest of today's webinar, that what that shows is that they really understand that there's one number for each object in order to get to the end, and you have to sort of have it organized and know that if you have counted correctly, that set of objects is going to be stable. You're going to hit the same number you count it, even if you change the positioning around. That if you count a set of objects and you get 12, and then the next time you count it and you get 11, that's not okay. It's either 11 or it's 12. It can't actually be both. And for you folks who are out there, of course, who teach kindergarten, that doesn't come with them necessarily when they arrive in JK. That they know that if you count a set of objects twice, you should get the same number both times, and that's something that they're going to develop as they're experiencing counting collections. So when they have all of those pieces on board, I think it becomes interesting for them to skip count, and I usually do it with real objects first, so that they are really assigning. So now instead of saying 1, 2 when they count 2 objects, they're just saying 2 and touching those 2 objects. I think that's really helpful for them in the beginning. All right, I don't know if there are any more questions, but or comments from any of our educators. If There are lots of great songs and books out there as well. I think of like Chicka Chicka 1, 2, 3 is a really common popular book, or the book about the 10 dots. That's a really common one. So one thing that we could do is if you have a rhyme or a book that you like to use for counting, can you put it in the chat? Because then it'll give people the opportunity to take a look at that chat and maybe pull some ideas that are new for them. So if you have a rhyme or a song that you like, that you use for yourself with your students, or a book, just throw it up into the chat and make sure that you say panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it. That's a little extra layer. Just give everybody a moment to put something up in there. Your favorite book, finger play, song. I think another one that we did, that I've done with my kids that they really liked, was the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once I caught a fish alive. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. Kelly's asking, would you focus on mastering their numbers in increments of 10? It would really depend on the student and which pieces they're struggling with. So usually the first stumbling block, and this is probably where Alicia's students is usually around 6. And then they usually stumble again around 13 or 14. So that's usually what you can expect. And we saw that with the student there. We just saw where he stumbled at 14. That's really a common spot. Ooh, I don't know that one. What comes in 2s, 3s, and 4s? That sounds interesting. All right, if you come up with another one, it's an oldie. Okay, good to know. I might have to look it up. Sometimes the best books are no longer in print and you have to go and find them somewhere else, library. Okay, so if you think of something and you want to share, please just continue to put them there up in the chat because that's really helpful for people, I think, to see what other educators are doing. All right, so the next thing that we're going to look at, the next strategy on our list, is called tagging or pointing. And I did see people using that vocabulary when I asked you what you noticed in the first video. So this will be probably familiar for many of you. And if you don't know the word, you'll definitely know the action because we all do this when we count. This isn't something that fades if we need to count a sequence. So this is called tagging, or sometimes in Alex's book it's called one-to-one pointing. And basically what it means is that you're pointing at or touching each object once or only once. Now this does get a little tricky with some students who are inclined to touch with their eyes only and not actually move their finger, but it would still be called tagging or one-to-one pointing. You can see their eyes moving from the object, one object to the next object. And as you know, as educators, sometimes if they are making a lot of errors, we might encourage them to use their finger instead of their eyes because it can be a bit tricky to do that well. But then some students, they can do it perfectly every single time without touching anything. And so if that's the case, then I just leave it alone. If they're able to track, it's good for their brain to be able to hold on to what they've counted and not counted. Okay. So we're going to take a look at some of the tagging or counting errors. And the first sort of generalized error is basically they don't actually really understand counting yet, and so they don't actually know that they need to touch each object in order to tag, but they've seen people do it, so you can see them kind of modeling their action after what they've seen.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's a few other things going on there which we'll also investigate. But I just love this video. It made me so happy when I watched it because he's really trying. He's modeling him. You know, he's even got them all kind of lined up. He's probably seen that, and so he's modeling his counting after what he's seen, but he doesn't really understand it. He knows to say the sequence, and he knows to point, sort of, right? But he's missing a few pieces there. So we'll see this. I don't know how old this particular student would be, but I'm gonna guess, well, they were in kindergarten. 4, yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, 4. So that's great. That's obviously Tressa's, one of Tressa's. Okay, so yeah, it'll come together. He will learn, and we'll talk about some of the things that we can do to help him with his tagging. So that's sort of the really early stages of counting, I think, what we saw there. And then we have this one here, which is a lot more common. And in this way, they try to touch each object once, but they lose track. So they'd either, I shouldn't say either, they either skip an object or multiple objects, or they touch and count the same object twice. They touch the same object twice, or they do both, which can happen in a larger, definitely with a larger set of objects. You can both skip one or two or many, and also count several more than once as well. But in this case, what we'll see the student, I think it's fairly clear that the student, if we watch them, they're aware that they're trying to touch each object and that it matters that they get each one.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15.
And I just love the little hand motion there at the end, because I can just feel, and I could be wrong, and maybe their educator can help us out, but I just feel like they know that they're not sure if they've touched each one or if they've missed some. And this is a great place to be, because it seems like they have a desire to do it, and they understand that they should be touching each one once and only once, but they're struggling with keeping track, and we'll talk about that one a little bit later. I don't know if I'm right or wrong on that, maybe. Can't remember.
Jen says there that he starts in an organized way around the outside, and then when they get kind of to that inner part, they get a little confused. He knows he wants to touch each one, he just needs that organization piece.
Yeah, yeah. And he's at a perfect spot for some questioning around, what's, I can see that you're hesitating. We'll talk about that when we get to the organization side of things. But what I see is that he missed some, but also that he touched a couple of them more than once as well. So those are the two different errors that we see here, is either they miss an object or multiple objects, or they touch objects more than once. And so those would be tagging errors. And either of those is going to potentially get you to the incorrect count. Although if you do both of them in a certain way, you could still end up with the correct count, even though you have tagging errors. So that's something that you can only really catch, by watching that they are actually doing that correctly. Okay, so what can we do to help with students who are struggling with tagging? So one of the first things that I would work on, maybe with our first little one who was, knows the number sequence, but doesn't really know how to count yet is I would build from their subitizing. So last week we did subitizing. And so if they can subitize 4 or 5 or 6, like a student, maybe right now I've got 6, but I could have put 4 plates out if that's where we were at. If they could subitize, how many plates do you see? And they would know the answer to that question. I could put 3 plates out or 4. Then, you know, if you put 1 cracker on each plate, let's put 1 cracker on each plate and count the crackers when we put them out so that they're really, they already know that there's 6 plates. So, and we can put, if we could just count the plates, we say, let's count the plates, even once they've already told you how many are there. And then we can talk about putting a cracker on each plate and counting those crackers so that they can learn to touch each object as they're counting.
Heather,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
was just wondering, what is the difference between tagging and one-to-one correspondence, or are they the same thing?
That's such a great question, Molly. And you can, if we pop back a slide. To this one, where did it go? There, this one. If we pop back to this slide, you can see one-to-one correspondence down here on the continuum. And the one-to-one correspondence is a key idea. And actually, what I was fumbling with a little bit there around the plates is related to one-to-one correspondence. Let me just jump out of the slide deck for a second so I can jump back to this one here. So if they are different things, and I know that we have often in education muddied the water between these two things, because we often say one-to-one correspondence when what we mean is tagging. I would say usually that's the mistake that we tend to make. So tagging is the act of pointing to each object when you're counting. So that's tagging. And one-to-one correspondence is not a strategy that you can see, but it's a key idea that you can imply that they have based on you know, how they might answer a particular question. So the reason why I was fumbling a little bit when we were looking at this slide earlier is that if I ask them how many plates there are, and they say, let's say they count them and they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they use their finger, then you would see tagging. But if I ask them, if I'm going to put 1 cracker on each of those plates, how many crackers would you need? The idea that in order to put 1 on each of those plates, they would therefore need 6 crackers because there's 6 plates. That key idea is one-to-one correspondence. There's 1 cracker per plate. Therefore, if there are 6 plates, there must be 6 crackers. And that's a little bit more challenging than just counting. I don't know if you have more questions, Molly, or that's a great question because it is a term that's used interchangeably.
Oh yes, we've been using it for some time, thinking that it's pointing as they're counting and saying it's one-to-one correspondence. So that clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great. And I think with when we say one-to-one correspondence, when we mean tagging, we actually kind of mean tagging and the next one that we're going to talk about together. We'll take a look at that. The other thing that I wonder about, and I'm hoping that some of you will try it out and see if this helps, that perhaps part of what some students are struggling with, like our first little guy in the very first, not the very first video, but the video where he was just kind of sliding his finger along and not really identifying each cube, might just be the strategy of touching each object that they might need to work on separate from counting. So can you just actually touch each object and then try to bring it back into a counting sequence, probably with fewer objects? He seemed really solid to read that little guy. So maybe 4 is the right spot to be for him with counting.
So Heather, if I can just clarify, so it's okay to kind of go back and make sure that it's not a fine motor issue, so that the child is actually able to touch each item one time before you ask them to kind of coordinate or to, you know, say that number word.
Yeah, I'm interested in checking that out and testing that theory that just even the action of identifying, and it's like a visual and spatial and fine motor all kind of combined to be able to do that action. You might find, you'll see in this picture here, I picked one with the teddy bears as opposed to the cubes, which can sometimes get joined together, and that joining item is super fun for the kids, but sometimes might not be your friend if you're trying to work on tagging. So something that maybe is a discrete object, and it might help you out if you have a student who's really working on tagging. And I think bigger objects too. Again, same idea, you know, with the fine motor. If it's a bigger object, it might be easier for them to identify.
I think that's a really good concept that you just brought to our attention, Heather, that manipulative choice sometimes is what might set us up for success or failure with some kids with the activities that they're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, we love for them to have choice and to be able to pick their own, but sometimes the ones that they pick aren't necessarily the best item for them. And so having some opportunity for choice, but some opportunity for us as educators to choose to, I think is helpful. Okay, so we're going to hit our last piece here, coordinating. And this is literally where counting all comes together, is with the coordinating. So coordinating is assigning a count to each object as you touch it. And like I was saying to Molly earlier, this is kind of, I think, where we often will use one-to-one correspondence is tagging and coordinating together, that you're saying one number word for each object. And I think that's why the name one-to-one has kind of gotten a bit muddy there. So assigning a count to each object as you point or touch it. I find this one is the hardest one for us to identify as teachers as it's happening. Luckily, our educator friends were able to grab some wonderful video examples to help us understand. So there's really 2 main types of coordinating errors. As I was putting this webinar together, I was thinking, okay, there's really 2 main ones. There's one where they don't say a new number word when they're pointing at an object. So they move their finger to tag a new object, but they don't say another number word. So this is a little example of that.
1, 2, 6. Not that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It's a little tricky. I think maybe we'll play that one again. It's pretty quiet too. You'll see she makes a little number sequence error, but then self-corrects, which is quite lovely.
1, 2, 6. Not that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So the timing of the words and the pointing is not exactly right. And so she has 10 objects there and she ends up only counting 9 because she moves her finger and doesn't say a new word. And then another one that's really, really common, and we is saying a number while their finger is lifted. So they're in the process of moving it to the next item, but they say the numbers when their fingers are up. And I didn't find an example of that in our work, so I thought I would just switch over to my document camera so we could take a look at what that might look like. see if my yes, there we go. But you probably can't see it. So I will switch the screen share to this. You can see it now, I think. So the coordinating, what you'll sometimes see, so here I have 7 objects, but you might see somebody, a child say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know, that's a pretty common one, especially if they know the number sequence to 10. I wonder if anyone has seen that from our panel. They care to speak, say something.
Definitely. We were doing, we were working on one-to-one, so we were squishing the balls so that they actually put the movement with it. But one little boy was, as he squished, he would also say one coming up. So he'd squish with 1, then say 2, then squish for 3. And he wasn't actually counting the balls. He was just saying the numbers as he kind of went. He ended up having quite a nice pattern, but it wasn't the correct amount.
No, he might have an extra number for every ball, right? Because he says one when his finger's up. Yeah, and I mean that just shows you that they know if their number sequence is correct, and they tag each object once and only once, then they have those 2 parts down. It's just that coordinating that they're missing. So it would be a lovely example. Thanks for sharing that. Can you see the slide deck again? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so what ways can we help, how can we help this child that Tressa was just sharing with us about, who had a great, they know the number sequence, they have the idea of tagging, but they're just, you know, their coordinating is a little bit off. So one of the things that we talk about doing is making the action a little bit bigger so that they can really have a little bit more time to coordinate the number word with the action, and it just, I think it brings more attention to the count matching the motion, because the motion is now much bigger. So one thing that we'll do, for example, is like toss a ball, like these 2 children are doing. Oops. It's gonna play? No. I'll try it like this.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Awesome. So, you know, that action, that motion, it's a big motion, and then they're really having to attend to the coordination between the word and the action to help them out. Another one that we might do is with them coming down the stairs.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Right, so there's a little error there. He did take 1 step without saying a word, but his number sequence was perfect, and he did hit every step. He didn't fall, he stepped on every step, so the tagging would be correct and the number sequence is correct. So it's just that he's not saying a word with each step. So then we can draw his attention to, you know, slow him down a little bit, or make sure that we help them to say a word for each step. Oh, there we go. Another thing that you can do with something even a little smaller is just moving an object from one space to another, from one location to another. And this is a video that Jen Gardner shot for us last year.
Can you put 10 of these into here? Count 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, you get the idea. So that type of activity is something that's pretty straightforward to set up, but it does really draw their attention to coordinating the word with the action.
Can you
Okay,
put,
so we have looked at these three, and I just wonder if there are any questions that folks have or comments that any of our panelists want to bring up at this point after looking at those three strategies before moving on.
I think you've touched on a lot of my kind of wonderings, Heather.
All right. So I just thought it might be fun to look at a video and write down some of the things in the chat that we noticed that these students know. I do see a question maybe popped up, Alicia, in the questions. Is it about the three parts?
So the question is, would you go one more step and have them place on a 10 frame while they're coordinating? So is that a good tool to bring in at this point?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a structured model that you're talking about. And maybe you're talking about a bit of an organizer. I don't think it would hurt, but I don't know that it depends. I guess it doesn't have, I don't think it's required. It might help them if they can also subbutize on that model to know that their count is accurate up to that point. Like I said, I don't think it's going to hurt, but I don't know if it's going to make be any different from the container in terms of their counting. Might add something else to a different piece. Hard to know. Give it a try.
I also just noticed in our chat, Heather, that Carissa, one of our panelists, I think she's having tech issues as well. She mentioned that sometimes it's hard to assess when the kids are rushing through it if they're just doing it to get it done. So she often reminds her students to slow it down. And then she finds that, you know, with that prompt, they can actually dig in a little deeper and see who's having issues with coordinating, tagging, or just rushing.
It's true. You know, their personalities do play a role. And, you know, if we've pulled them away from something fun that they were doing in order to do a little bit of an assessment, they might be inclined to get it over with as fast as possible. So knowing your students is always so critical, because some of them do benefit, I'm sure, from the prompt to just kind of slow it down, but they don't always know at that point when they're rushing. I think they don't always know that they should get the same count every time. You know, they don't have that need for getting it for that it's going to be correct. Sometimes they're just counting because we're asking them to count, but they don't actually have a need for getting the count correct. And the knowledge that each time they count a set of objects, they should get the same number, because counting for them is sometimes just about the process of saying the words and pointing and all of that, and it's not about finding out how many there are there. So, because sometimes that's not that important. So sometimes what we'll do often, that one of my favorite activities is to have students help with collecting objects for a particular task. Like there are 11 of us at the carpet and we need 11 markers. So can you go get 11 markers for us? You know, give them a reason to have the right number, you know, and then that helps. Great question. So I thought that we would take a look at this a little, the student counting, and we would see, like, what do we think they know? What parts of counting are, you know, do they understand? What parts are they struggling with? So we'll take a look at this little video.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 16, 18, 19, 12, 13, 16.
how many altogether?
16.
I don't know if that's pretty typical of the fall of JK or if this is sort of more middle of JK, but I'm going to play it one more time. And we're looking for sort of what do they know? And we can put that in the chat. Don't forget to include the attendees. And then what pieces of counting are they struggling with?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 19, 12, 15, 16.
all together.
16.
Okay, so the started strong with the number sequence. I see people saying that. Yeah, the tagging is a struggle past 5 objects. So LM brings up the idea of cardinality, which is cardinality is understanding that the last number they say represents all the objects in the group. How many are there? Not just the last one that they touch. So that she's showing at least that that's the pattern she knows, that the total amount in the set in the group is that last number she said. She remembered the last number she said. So that is tricky that she knows that. I'm not sure how well she really has cardinality because it's such a big set of numbers, but it's interesting to hear that she answered that question correctly. It kind of surprised me at the end that she could do that. So they know how to count, they just don't know how to organize. And I think, as somebody says, and they went from 7 to 18. Yeah, so the number sequence, they're up to, I think 6 is pretty solid, but then it does fall apart. I don't know if somebody says 7, so maybe I didn't listen to it closely enough. But definitely somewhere in that vicinity, and then it falls apart. And they go up and then they repeat some numbers too after they've said all the ones that they know. If they know a few in the teens, 18, 19, and 12, I believe.
Heather?
Yeah.
Sorry. She said 16 because that was the number of the day.
Okay.
She doesn't have 16. That was just a happy coincidence that she landed. She knew she wanted to get to that number, but she doesn't have anything past 7.
Right. Okay. So she landed there because she knew that was the pattern that she knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She knows.
Well, that makes
that
sense
number
to me. That's the cardinality piece at the end, that she knew she was going to end up with 16. So she doesn't really have cardinality. She just knew that the answer is going to be 16 because that's the number of the day. Okay, well, that's lovely. That's a great insight, Tressa, to know that in this particular instance, it doesn't actually mean likely cardinality because of the setup. One thing that I noticed that's really cool is that she does kind of run her finger over all of the buttons. She doesn't tag them, and she doesn't know to put a word. She does know a lot about trying to put words to the tagging, so the coordinating, she knows a little bit about that. But as the numbers get bigger, the more buttons, she just kind of runs her hand over. But she does run her hand over, I think, most of the buttons. So, I think when she figures it out, she's going to be organized enough to not double count. She sometimes knows where she's been already a little bit. So I think that she's going to be an interesting one to watch and to continue to work with.
I was just going to say, Heather, that she had her little brother beside her that was trying to help her count and correct, and she wasn't listening to him. She kept wanting to count her way, even though he was chirping in and saying the correct numbers.
It's perfect though, because we have to understand it ourselves. It doesn't matter if it's a teacher or a sibling or a friend chiming in from the side. It doesn't necessarily help us because we have to construct these things ourselves. We're going to just watch one more little one on analyzing that I think is a little maybe easier. I started with a hard one, and then we're going to just talk very briefly about one more key idea that we haven't talked about yet.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
How many is there?
8.
So I'm going to play it again, and what I want you to watch for is this a tagging issue? Or is this a synchrony issue? It's cut off a little bit at the beginning because he starts when he's already on cube number 3, but we'll just watch from there. So are we having a tagging issue, or is this a coordinating issue, a tagging issue, or is it both of them?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8.
And see if you can pick it up. I did download it and open it in in QuickTime so I could watch it in slow motion. And so sometimes a video is worth a lot because it's hard to tell in real time exactly what's going on. But I wonder if some of you, more skilled than I am because you teach kindergarten all the time, were able to pick it up. You can put it in the chat. I'll just play it one more time.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So tagging issue would be if he missed a cube or touched the same cube twice, that would be a tagging error. And a coordinating error would be if he says number words when he's not touching, or he says number words, two number words when he's touching the same cube. So Jennifer says he's missing one. He does. He misses the 5th cube. And he touches this cube here twice. So he tags.
How many is there?
8, 7, 8.
Yeah, here we go.
4, 5, 6, 7.
So you can see his finger is moving more than his words. So he's actually got the coordinating and the tagging are both a little bit off. And I think some of those coordinating exercises would really help him out, and the bigger motions to help him.
He was one of the ones also that when we told him to slow it down, he took a minute and then was able to do a lot better with it and actually tag each individual one. He was one of our rushers that we had to assess a couple times, right, to know if it was a tagging issue or not.
Yeah, and I wonder too, another thing that I just dawned on me, Chris, as you were saying that, is if the discrete manipulatives might help him rather than the cubes that are attached together, just to try and see if that helps him to slow down and identify individual objects too. It is tricky when the cubes are connected, harder. So yeah, something to try. That's great. They don't yet have one of the key ideas that we're going to talk about in just a second. So cardinality's already come up. So I'm just going to throw the definition out there, which is knowing that the final number represents all the objects in the set rather than just the last item. So one of the important things I think for educators to know about this is that when they finish, when the student is finished counting and they reach the final number, it's really important to ask, so how many are there? And not to just assume that because they hit the correct number at the end that they actually know that that's how many are in the set. So what you'll see sometimes is a student just recount when you ask that question. So they'll count to 5. Yeah, exactly. Jennifer says, yeah. So they will often recount if you ask that question. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many are there? 5.
So here he understands that cardinality to 5 at least when she asks, so how many, he can restate that last number as the total that he objects, and it's not just about that last green bear. This one is not number 5. The whole set is 5.
1.
Okay, last thing before we go is this key idea here at the bottom, the need for organizing. And oops, yes, I don't have a picture or a definition or anything. I was looking through a bunch of books looking to see if I could find it to put something in there. It's and so I think it's fitting that there's nothing on the page actually, because it's a little bit of an aloof idea. I think that quite often we as educators, I know I did with my own first child, and then I learned more, and with the second one I didn't, but I would tell her to line things up so that she wouldn't make a mistake. And what I know now is that the child needs to develop the need for organizing. And I think that sometimes is why our rushers rush. They don't actually have a need to get to the knowledge that that the set's going to have a certain number, and each time you count it, it should get to that same number. That need for there's a reason to come up with the correct number at the end for them. So they're still working on that. In mathematics, there's always this need for organizing that we have, so that we don't lose track of what we're doing. And so the same is true of our students when they're learning to count. So often what I'll do is, particularly I want to draw your thinking back to one of the first videos that we looked at for counting, which was the one where was it? This one here, where he was counting and he knew that he wanted to get them all, but he didn't, he knew that he maybe had missed some, or that he had counted some more than once. He wasn't sure. And so this is where, with the need for organization and keeping track, I might do one of two things. I might partner them at the small table, a couple of students who are at this point similarly, where I can really tell that they are thinking about, have I counted that one yet or not? They understand that they want to only touch each one once and only once to get to the right answer, or the correct answer. And I might partner them at that table with someone who's doing some organizing already, and ask, what is it that you are doing, and why are you doing that? And they will tell you that it's hopefully because they're maybe losing track, and they want to make sure that they only count each object one time. And in the case of this student, if I don't have anyone to partner with him with, I might just say, I wonder if there's a way. Like, what's going on there? What are you thinking about? I can see you're kind of hesitating there at the end. I think he would say, like, I'm not sure if I counted that one already. And so then I would say, I wonder if there's a way that like something that you could do that would help you remember which ones you'd already counted, and see if they can come up with a strategy on their own. Hopefully some kind of organizing, maybe where they're pulling one off to the side, like we might do as adults, or lining them up. Any of those strategies will work to help them remember which ones they've already counted. And if they can't come up with something, then I would probably partner them with somebody who is doing it, hopefully, and we could have a conversation around why they were doing that and how that might help them. And hopefully then this student can latch on to that wonderful and important idea. But I do want it to come from them and not from me, if at all possible. So that's all I have for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather. Lots of great information there. So again, if anyone has any further questions or you want to learn more, don't forget you have lots of experts in your own building. Reach out, ask a colleague. You can also connect with the instructional coach in your building. The blog has lots of great information up there. The what to look for books are in every school, and you can also watch those archive sessions that will be on the blog. Okay.
We've also put 2 links in the chat. Sorry, Alicia.
Yeah.
The first link is a Google form. We love to learn and grow, and from our participants. So if you could just quickly go to this link and spend a couple minutes telling us what you thought, what your thoughts were, any feedback from us, that would be wonderful. And we've also put a link in there for a collaborative deck. So if everybody could grab that link right now, it'll take you to a Google slide that Alicia made. Alicia, if you want to just talk to it.
Yeah, so I just, some feedback we received from the last is that we always kind of want to go back from a session with kind of something to give a try to. So we decided I just started the template through a couple ideas that we had talked about with Heather and also our wonderful panelists that joined us. So please feel free to, add some ideas that maybe you have or have used in your classroom, and then take ideas, borrow them, give them a try. So that's just kind of a place that we're going to house kind of some shared resources, and we will keep the deck going. I also included some information from session 1, and next Tuesday we have another session, so we will add to it. So please feel free. It's like a working document for you guys to use and collaborate with. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah, and it is because I shared it within LKDSB. You have to make sure you're signed in with your LKDSB lakehead.com in order to get access to that. Okay.
So we'd like to just thank everyone for coming today. Heather, Wark, it's always such a treat to have you here. You're just a wealth of knowledge, and we could talk to you all day about how kids learn math and how we can help them move further along. Teresa, Molly, and Jen and Carissa, thanks a ton for all your work that you did this past week getting ready and shooting those great videos for us.
Yes, thank you. That was amazing. You guys are the best.
Agreed. Those are fantastic videos. It gave us lots of, I think it's so valuable to be able to see it in action.
For sure.
Okay, everyone, thanks. Have a great night, and we'll see you next Tuesday night.